క్షణం భక్తాభీష్టవరాభయప్రదకరం కౌపీనమాత్రోజ్వలం స్వాత్మానందరసానుభూతివివశం సర్వానవద్యాంగకం శ్రీమంతం శ్రీరమణీశ్వరం గురువరం యోగాసనాధ్యాసితం ధ్యాయేత్ శ్రీరమణీశ్వరం ధ్యాయేత్ శ్రీరమణీశ్వరం ధ్యాయేత్ శ్రీరమణీశ్వరం హృదయకుహరమధ్యే కేవలం బ్రహ్మమాత్రం యహమహమితి సాక్షాత్ ఆత్మరూపేణ భాతి హృది విషమనసా స్వం జిన్వత మజ్జతవ పవనచలనరోధ ఆత్మనిష్టో భవత్వం. Namo Ramana. In the Tuesday Satsang from Ramanacentre for Learning, Bangalore, we have been reading about Mahakrishna Swami's reminiscences of his stay in Ramanashramam, which has been captured in this book, Years in the Presence of Ramana, My Master, which has been edited by our founder, President Sri A.R. Natarajanji. After reading this week's reminiscences, we will meditate, have the Atma Vichara for 20 minutes. Following that, today Nandakumar ji would be contemplating on Atma Vichara, and then we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. We have been looking at the reminiscences regarding the animals at the Ramanashramam. Mahakrishna Swami continues to say, Bhagavan Sri Ramana was invariably kind with the animals. In the ashram, all cohabited in harmony, and the cats were taught not to hunt squirrels, just as they were not hunted by the dogs. The squirrels used to run from the window to his sofa and then to the rest of the hall. He fed them with nuts and cares them. Some even had names. The main aspiration of these little animals was to build a nest under the sofa. In this way, their families would be under the protection of the master. It was not permitted to kill snakes or scorpions. Sometimes a snake entered the hall at night, and it was the function of the attendant to place a light close to it so that all could see it, thereby avoiding incidents. Madhavan, one of the attendants, was skillful in catching scorpions by the tail, stopping them from attacking and taking them outside, where they could do no one harm. Sri Ramana greatly appreciated the happy agitation of the monkeys and frequently said that sometimes they were cleverer than the beings called human. They lived one day at that time, did not plan for the future, and had no premeditation even in the confusions and mischiefs that they created. He had much fun when some monkeys Slily entered the hall and turned over the plate of fruit received by devotees as prasada. Bhagavan gave instructions for them to be fed and encouraged them in their frolics, which was the annoyance of the attendants. This just reminds me of an incident which Sharda Akka shared in the Ramana shrine recently on the Shadakshari ji's uh, family event that took place last Sunday. In that, she said that Shadakshari ji had a swapna or a vision in which he was in Ramanashramam and prasadam was being distributed to everybody. And naturally, since he was present, he put his hand forward and some cashew nuts were given to him. And he again stretched the other hand to receive some more of it. And then Bhagavan asked him, why does he need more? And then when he mentioned the extra is for tomorrow, and Bhagavan apparently said, your tomorrow is in my hands. So here Bhagavan is very beautifully saying to all of us that the monkey is much better than us, in the sense our mind, having a lot of data, feels that it has the willpower to plan for tomorrow, day after, and all of it. Whereas Bhagavan is saying here that the animals, the monkeys, were much cleverer, that they only lived on that day. And recently I was listening to one of the talks of Nachu Swami, in which one of these sadhakas puts a very a simple question. He asks, as a sadhaka, what is that I should do every day? Is not, Nachu Swami says that is very, we will not go into what we need to do internally. That is there, the Atma Vichara or whatever that we need to do, the self-abidance part. But what he says is, the important thing is that we should continue to do the sadhana. Whatever sadhana we are doing, we should be regular at it. That is the most important part. And he continues to say, if Bhagavan advocated anything apart from that, in terms of externally, he only talked about having sattvic food. So that it would help the mind to calm and to become more one-pointed. So it is very important here that we, as sadhakas, that we learn from these natural animals, which has been blessed by the divine, to just live on the day-to-day basis. We should perhaps pray to that very same force, the divinity, to help us also attain that one-pointedness and that to live on a day-to-day basis and continue to do that one-pointed efforts towards the divine in whatever sadhana that we are practicing. Doesn't really matter as long as it is turned as or have the objective only of the divinity. So continuing further, the most important thing to be observed in the relationship between Bhagavan Sri Ramana and the animals was the simple and natural manner in which they lived together. In other words, being both in the natural state, the communication between them was perfect, and each one expressed himself as he could. That is, Ramana conversed with them as if he was speaking to any person, and the animals responded as if it was to another of the same species. So here we can recognize how Bhagavan was revealing to all of us that in nature, the Ishvara, even though in the manifested way, the forms may be different, but that one single force is all that is working. And as Bhagavan often keeps reminding us, we should let that divine force act through the body, through the mind, our intellect. And if the ego can less intervene, that is all that is to be looked after. So here Bhagavan is, the reminiscences is very beautifully saying how naturally the conversation between Bhagavan and animals happened, because they have a very less degree of the the mischiefs that we carry. And I was listening to one of the talks of um, one of the Swamijis who was in Himalayas, and he is a Westerner, and he was initially told that there are a lot of wild animals in the Himalayas. Thus, there are wild uh, panthers and snakes and jackals and many of them. And one of the Hindu Indian sannyasi told him, so long as you don't disturb them, you give them their space, and so long as you don't get disturbed by them, they will give you your space. So you need not fear about them, even though you may have to sleep in open spaces. So long as you give them their space, they naturally understand that they need to give you the same space to you. So here Bhagavan is telling how naturally everything is fine, and how the ego, the meaning making machine, often intervenes and makes what is so naturally smooth journey very, very cumbersome. Further, he he captures all that supposedly exists, all that is seen, is manifestation of the Supreme Self, the only reality. All are one, all are divine in essence, and the differences exist only on the mental level. It is the mind that creates the barriers between the divine manifested in human form and the same divine manifested in animal, vegetable, or mineral forms. The difference is in the level of the form only. When one is conscious of this unity, when one is capable of looking to one's fellow and seeing in him the essence and not the form, there exists no barrier. Now, often when we read this, we tend to believe that we should practice this seeing of oneness among all. But Bhagavan says that is like superimposing oneness on something which we have already created as a separate. Something like if I see somebody else as separate, I've already created the difference. And then I am mentally trying to superimpose a unity. But if we go back to our own natural state, if we can inquire to whom is this, who am I, we find that self is already in unity with everything. And therefore, in the self, there is none of these agitations or thoughts, this I have to do or this I have to know. And therefore, to become one with the self here, that is the most easiest way to practice oneness with everything. So that is why Bhagavan, in his compassionate thing, has given us Atma Vichara. He says, whenever you see differences in whatever which way, all we need to do is inquire to whom is this, who am I? And when we get back to our own self, everything, all differences, all that we need to do all that we need to know, all that we need to accomplish is accomplished there. So Bhagavan has, with lot of compassion, has given us this Atma Vichara. It is because of this that Bhagavan Sri Ramana could relate to animals and all beings naturally, help them and be helped by them. This is the thing, the natural truth, which is the substratum. If we can go back to our own natural truth, that is the best way to connect with the natural truth, which alone is. So, Atma Vichara, which Bhagavan has blessed us, is the most direct path for us to experience the natural oneness, which alone is. So, Bhagavan says, no matter how many thoughts come, no matter what all objects appear, if we inquire to whom is this, the answer would be to me. And the me or I is the first and the foremost division that has been created. Therefore, to transcend that division, he asks us to diligently inquire, who am I? And when we trace what do I refer to as I, then by the grace of the Master, we reach the self. And by repeated practice, we clearly start to understand the folly that is created by the mind, by the division in the consciousness. And the more and more we recognize the unit, the underlying unity and the naturalness of it, the more and more we have to practice. As Nochu Swami says, that alone is the practice that has to be done, nothing else. And in due course, everything will fall naturally in place. The sahaja, which is very natural, will be seen to be effortlessly available to us, not only to us, but to everybody. That is the absolute reality of everything. And therefore, it becomes much easy and much clearer to effortlessly remain in one's own truth. Therefore, Atma Vichara is the most direct path that has been blessed by Bhagavan to us. With his abundant grace, for the next 20 minutes, let us practice Atma Vichara. Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramana. Namo Ramana. I now request Nandakumar ji continue to take us more in the path of self-abidance. Namo Ramana, sir.
Namo Ramana. From the reading of Dileep ji, we find how Bhagavan shows us that we are trapped in time. We, by the very non-presence of surrender. And the animals, by their living for the day and leaving the tomorrow to Bhagavan's hands, they show us what a life of surrender is, what a life of renunciation is. Bhagavan sometimes says that monkey which lives without storing food is the real sannyasi, whereas in this ashram full of sannyasis, we have the storeroom, we plan our meals and keep the food in stock so that we don't run out of it for days and weeks. Who is the real sannyasi, he would ask. So in the same vein, what is it that makes us behave like this underlyingly? What is the connection with self-enquiry? When we see this morning in a satsang of Ulladu Narpadu, we were taking up the verse number 14, I think. The verse number 14 is on the personalities, that says that only after the first person arises, the second and the third persons arise. When the truth of the first person is sought, then the first person vanishes into the self of all. So do the second and third person, who now have no existence to be dealt with. Now we were discussing this verse, and earlier in that satsang, the other person had asked me, can there be any guided meditation in self-enquiry? Can there be guided meditation practice in self-enquiry? And we found that the Ulladanarpadi itself is a guided meditation to self-enquiry. That the verses of Ulladanarpadi is a meditation on the verses given by Bhagavan, but each of them take us to self-enquiry. So when we study the verses of Ulladanarpadi, we will find that each one of them is a guided meditation from Bhagavan, which will put us steadily on the course to self-enquiry. So this verse number 14, is one such guided meditation which will firmly put us to self-enquiry. The verse, to repeat, says that Tanmai Undel Mundilai Padarkaigal Tamulava Tanmayin Munmayai Tanainde Tanmayarin Munilai Padarkai Mudivutru Undrai Volirum Tanmaye Tanilai Meta. So the second and third persons arise only after the first person has arisen in us. So don't follow the second and third person thoughts. Only inquire into the truth of the first person. There, the first person's ego will merge in the self and the ego will vanish. The very ego principle will vanish in the self. Therefore, in that self, there is no second or third persons to be dealt with. While discussing that verse, one interesting point that came up was that just as the jiva permeates this body, permeates the sthula sarira, similarly, the self of Ishvara permeates the whole cosmos, permeates the whole creation as I. And that is what Bhagavan, he calls as the Ishvara's Meyaham. Meyaham means true self, the I which permeates the whole creation. And when we inquire into the truth of the first person, where does it take us? It takes us to that which permeates everything, and then there is no other to permeate as it is standalone. That is where the self reveals itself. We were discussing this, and we came to one additional support that Bhagavan, what he is saying is that this persona discussion, this verse itself can be taken as complete inquiry into the self by itself. Because the Ishvara's persona covers all the non-self. The Ishvara's I covers all the non-self. So that means there need not, this inquiry into personality itself is a complete discussion in itself, where the whole area of non-self is taken to the self of all. You don't need to think of the non-personal thoughts, that the Ishvara's self covers everything. And of course, we can validate that by understanding that whatever thoughts come to us are permeated by our I. Whatever the thought may be, that is permeated by our self. Therefore, is in fact our own self looked at as that thought. So first point that came was that this inquiry into the first person leaves nothing as residue, nothing left over. It is complete in itself. If you just keep letting go of the second and third persons and keep holding the first person, then you reach the self of all. Now, interestingly, another point came up, which is what gives us a connect with the lives of the monkeys who live for the present day and leave the worries of tomorrow to God. Why we are not able to do that is that we found in discussing the verse, we found that the other gentleman practicing self-inquiry, he was saying that of late the self-inquiry has become deep. But then some of the difficult thoughts which I have tried to avoid have started falling off. Some of the thoughts of misery have started falling off in self-inquiry. But often the thought comes, how to avoid those miseries coming back again? How to avoid those miseries coming back again? So what to do with this? That is, with practice of first person, second person, third person, and practice of self-inquiry, some of the deeply miserable thoughts which come repeatedly, they are now falling off. How to not get this again was the question. And we chanced upon something by Bhagavan's grace, that it is not only the second and third persons are apart from us. We actually divide ourselves as first person and second person. That is, we have this habit of, we are the person now, and we have some memories, some thoughts, some of which we want to avoid, some of which we have somehow seen that we are getting it, they have reduced, but somehow the thought is how to avoid this in future. This should not come back again. What should I do so that this misery does not come back again? So what we do, we have this constant underlying model that we are this self now. We have some memories, some of which we want to avoid. Therefore, immediately we look to a future self which will be without those misery. that we create the second self of ourself only as a future self, which will be free of that trouble. And this is the way in which we have not only avoided pain, but also espoused good thoughts, espoused good experiences, so that we could become better self. He himself, when I suggested about the miserable thoughts that we want to avoid, he himself said there is also the positive thought that I want to repeat. That I was in self-enquiry when I was in some place for 5 hours. I would read Sadhuvam and then 1 hour meditation. Read Sadhuvam, 1 hour self-enquiry. I have always wondered that when I will get it back. So it is through avoidance of thoughts that we don't want to have, and to espouse good experiences that we have recorded, that we get into this mode of present self and future self. That means the second person is ourselves only, not somebody else, but a future self. And the beauty of it is, this is the very process. That is, there is a past self, which is reviewed by a present self, and we move on to what thoughts to avoid, what experiences to avoid, what experiences to have, so that we are a better self in future. This is the very mode which has helped us to come to the human existence, and in human existence, it has helped us make the situation better for us. It is not just like hare's horn or something like that. That this is something with which we have come up to this point. And now we realize this model itself is limited. That any new self that's going to come is still going to be limited and is only tinkering with the experiences. Instead of this experience, I should avoid this. Instead of that experience, I should expose more of that. And the future self will be a better Nandakumar. So forget about the second and third persons being somebody else. Underlyingly, we have this model where we have the past self reviewed by the present self, and from the past we avoid something and we expose something and become the better self. And this model underlies all our experiences. That means this first past self, present self, and future self model underlies all our experiencing of objects, all our knowledge, and all our relationship with second and third persons. That means basically, even when we talk of what objects that we are enjoying, what is the work we are doing, what we are having as underlying unobserved is that we are having this model of past self reviewed by the present self, wanting to espouse some thoughts, wanting to get rid of some thoughts, and become a relatively better self. So this is a constant model, and this is a second person created by ourselves, not a second person outside of us. And when we hit upon this, that what Bhagavan says, are there three selves? So we basically came to the solution that the problem is not with the objects, the problem is not with the experiences we have, the problem is not with the people we are related with, but the problem is basically at the root that we have this model that we are discontented with who we are, with the possessions what we have, and we want to tinker with it, rearrange the mind so that we have a better relative self. And this is what makes for this underlying model. If we forget it and keep dealing with our experiences and other people, this keeps festering. This habit is there. And what it does, it prevents us from looking into the Paramatma within. Hariyaditara Jivara Ahavarisa Guhayil Arivairami Paramatman Arunachala Ramana. The ego, because of this underlying model, and which seems to have benefited us in coming to human birth and to proceeding to be a better human being, that very model has this limitation that unlike the animals, we are always planning for the future. We are always planning for what is in store for us, how we can have the better insurance, how we can have the better things in store, so that tomorrow we are a better self. And what does Bhagavan says? Are there two selves? The self of today and the self of tomorrow. No, for whom is this? The moment the mind moves to this model, The moment the mind asks, right, tomorrow when he calls, what should I do? Yesterday I made this mistake while talking to him. What should be my change so that tomorrow I talk differently? What is the thing that is happening? Underlyingly, I want to tinker with some of the behaviors so that tomorrow myself will be a better self than today. Immediately, one should recognize the underlying problem that I am unlike the monkeys who are content with the present. I always want to tinker and move into a future self which is more comfortable, more relatively better off. So immediately, are there two selves? Are there two selves, one now and one in the future? Is the question. The moment the movement of thought is there, that how with better things tomorrow, what are the things to be done tomorrow, so that I'll be safer, I will be better, I will be more educated, I will be more comfortable, I will be more responsible, I will be less risky. All these things, that postponement, we can identify with that I am expecting tomorrow I will be a better self and will benefit from that. Immediately catch it. For whom is this tomorrow self? Who am I? That whole structure of whatever the I was holding, whether as object, whether as experience, or as relationship with other, becomes immaterial. All of them collapse when this underlying model of the ego today and ego tomorrow as two different things that keeps there, that keeps being there, and not trusting that God will take care of tomorrow. We always construct something that in that situation, in that circumstance, I will be better off. And that very movement makes the mind move to tomorrow, makes the mind move to a prospectively better self. And once we are attentive to this, that is perhaps the only thing to be attended, that we are constantly looking to be a better self tomorrow, more improved self tomorrow. For whom are there two selves, one now and one tomorrow? Are there two selves, one bound by circumstances and one free of circumstances? That is the only question to be asked. And that brings us to the stillness. That brings us to the natural happiness of the still I. We stop looking for happiness from the events. We stop looking for happiness from the experiences. We stop looking for happiness from other people. And we come to the Bhagavan's presence within, which completely dissolves the miseries of the experiences, the tomorrows, the time and place, the other people, and understands that the basic problem is I am not satisfied with who I am now. I am not satisfied with what I am having now. Somehow I feel tomorrow I can alter the circumstances and be a more comfortable self. This is the underlying persona creation that we are constantly doing. The moment one identifies, understands this, then by Bhagavan's grace, one understands this is the only thing to be observed. This underlying habit. It's not with that we are concerned with the other people, the experiences, or other things. We desperately want to be a better self, a more comfortable self tomorrow. And the basic question is, are there two selves in us? Who am I? That comes to the firmness or the stillness, which does not call for any of the other things which we were feeling as important earlier. The only movement to be seen is the movement of wanting to be a better ego surrounded by better circumstances. And this brings the complete stillness of the I. And this Purana is experienced directly as the source of the one self, and the whole structure of misery of the seer seeing seen, knower knowing known is absorbed in that Spurana, which is nothing other than Bhagavan's grace, which takes care of us today, which takes care of us tomorrow. And one understands, though there is the grain in the storeroom, one is living like that monkey. One is living like that monkey because one is not thinking that that is any security at all. The grain in the storeroom is not the security. The self of all is the only security. And one understands this is what Bhagavan appreciates in the monkey. This is what Bhagavan appreciates in the animals, that one does not take any other security other than the self of all. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Namo Ramana.
Namo Ramana, sir. Very nice. Thank you. Apara Satchit Sukhavarirashi Yasyornimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chintavihinam Chintayami Chintavihinam Hrudi Chintayami. Namo Ramana. Namo Ramana. Namo Ramana.
Namo Ramana. Namo Ramana.